This video is best viewed on a stereoscopic 3D monitor or with YouTube's cardboard viewing option. For more 3D options, use the Flash Player by clicking the first link in the description. Welcome to Stereo 3D Productions, everyone. We're in for a good one today. It's time to cover a game that I've sort of built a love-hate relationship with, and I'm going to show you how to run it with VorpX in excellent virtual reality. The game I'm talking about is Singularity. Before I go on with today's main attraction, I do want to make a few notes on how this VorpX tutorial series works. First and foremost, if you haven't watched it already, you should definitely go through the VorpX Universal Guide video, which this series is founded on. It'll help you understand the setup procedure for this game and others. There's a link to the Universal Guide video in the description. Additionally, this series is designed to be open for updates. If you see the tag outdated between brackets in the title of this video, look for a link to an updated version of this video in the description. If you've been subscribed to Stereo 3D Productions since 2016 or earlier, you've likely seen the Singularity Let's Play series on this channel. However, more recent subs may not be aware of it. This is because my experience with the game started very well, but about halfway in, the nature of the gameplay proved to be rage-inducing for me. Now, that's not to say that this is a bad game. In fact, I'm here doing a tutorial for VorpX today. I wouldn't do this if I hated Singularity. But what really vexed me past part 6 of my Let's Play series is that the game started having a serious gameplay identity issue. Do you want to be crafty, full of combat? Are you going to get tactical on me? What's with these awful tick enemies, and why am I suddenly forced to have to sneak in an otherwise over-the-top, flat-out action shooter? Anyways, for the purpose of VR, this doesn't matter. The half that I've played through was actually quite satisfying, and while Singularity does borrow from many elements featured in other games, they've arranged it in an original way that feels quite unique in VR. I've played a lot of various titles by now in VR, first party or third party, and I can tell you that this one did leave a bit of a mark in my memory, more so than others, given there are things in there you just won't see anywhere else. And by the way, it's also likely that some players will find things are the other way around. They'll prefer the second half to the first. It's really a matter of opinion. My take is most people will like the entire game, hence why I've chosen to put Singularity in my tutorial's hit list. Today's setup is a manual VR configuration, and while you'll be surprised by how good the game's vScore is, the game is shockingly not on VorpX's official support list. In my opinion, I do believe this title could be eligible for direct VR support, but for some reason it's been put to the side and needs a special custom profile configuration to get going. Singularity's setup procedure also introduces a software program we've not seen yet in the series to date: Flawless Widescreen. There's more steps than usual, but don't worry, nothing is complicated, so here we go. Before you get going, fire up Singularity in 2D without VorpX or your runtime so we can go change some settings. First, go in the video options and make sure full screen is off. In the effects, the only one I'll bring up is depth of field, mostly because in this case I recommend turning it on. I'll go on about why later in the video. Last and very important, make sure that VSync is unchecked. That option will cause the game to run at 1/3 the required frame rate or less if you turn it on accidentally. You may notice I leaped right over resolution. This is intentional. We will have a quicker way to deal with this later on in the setup. Next, leave the video settings and go under control settings. We're going to reduce this game's otherwise high default mouse sensitivity. Lower the slider all the way to the left, then, using your keyboard arrows, press the right arrow 4 times. This should be a good balance between your mouse and your head tracking. Turn aim assist off before leaving this section, and voila, you can go back to the main menu and quit the game. Before jumping to VorpX, we can apply a little fix for the game's dynamic shadows and make sure the game's motion blur is not enabled. This distribution of Unreal Engine 3 used for Singularity is weird. It stores the game settings in the registry instead of an INI file. Press the Windows key on your keyboard and hold down the R key at the same time, and a window will come up. Type regedit in there, R-E-G-E-D-I-T. This launches the Windows registry editor. Navigate to the path I'm showing on screen. First, find the key called Dynamic Shadows. Double-click on it, enter a value of 0, and hit OK. Find the key called Motion Blur, and repeat this process again, putting a value of 0. You can go ahead and close the registry editor once you're done. Before even running this game with VorpX, you'll need a custom profile in order to get it to work. Fortunately, the discovery was easy enough. The Unreal Engine 3 profile works great with Singularity. Head into Local Profiles in the VorpX Configuration tool and find the Unreal Engine 3 profile. Click the button to make a copy based on that profile. I'll rename mine, keeping the name of the original profile in there so I know which one I used. Once your copy is done, select it and click the Add button on the top right. Find the file singularity.exe, which will be located in a subfolder called Binaries in the game's root. Now we have the game ready to launch with a clone of the Unreal Engine 3 profile. There won't be anything to do in the settings optimizer here since custom profiles don't have any means of using that feature. Instead, we'll be getting the game ready with flawless widescreen. For this process, we're going to have to use an application called Flawless Widescreen for two purposes: setting resolution and increasing field of view. There will be a link in the description to the Flawless Widescreen website where you can download and install a copy. Don't worry, it's free, it's quick to install, and it's not a big download. Start Flawless Widescreen and install the Singularity profile within it. This will open a tab with a setup procedure specific to the game. First, set your resolution. For low-spec systems on a GTX 970 equivalent or lower, use 1280 by 1024. For mid-end systems with a GTX 980 equivalent, use 1400 by 1050. Last, for high-end systems using a GTX 1080 equivalent or greater, use 1600 by 1200. Hit Set Resolution, and then hit the Next Step button. In the next tab, slide FOV Fine Adjustment all the way to the maximum of 20. Make sure Fix Enabled remains checked. You're done with Flawless Widescreen, but don't close it. You'll need it to stay open for the duration of your gameplay. Side note, the next time you start Flawless Widescreen in future sessions, you'll notice it appears resolution has reverted, which is not the case. Just launch your game after Flawless Widescreen. Your resolution should stay at what you originally set it to, so you don't have to be concerned with that. If the field of view seems like it changed, hold down your numpad plus key, the Flawless Widescreen Increase FOV hotkey, until it returns to the maximum. Go ahead and launch your runtimes, VorpX, and Singularity. Head into the game, let the intro movie finish, watch the cutscene in the helicopter by turning on VorpX's virtual cinema feature on, and once you finally reach the docks, you can go ahead and turn virtual cinema off, open the VorpX HUD, and start your configuration. Under Main Settings, set 3D Reconstruction to Geometry if it isn't already. Set Separation Strength to 0.8, which will give you a realistic impression of world scale. The default Unreal Engine 3 profile has some camera height modifier to it. Make sure to set that value to 0 to avoid problems. Next, under Image Settings, set Crystal Image to Normal. You can set it to off for an ever so slight, and I mean really slight performance boost, but this game's aliasing issues make this feature somewhat necessary. I'll go on about those aliasing issues later. Last, make sure image zoom is at 1.0. Under Display Settings, set Direct Mode Fluid Sync to off. Under head tracking settings, if you've used the mouse sensitivity demonstrated earlier in this video, put head tracking sensitivity at 0.42. If you plan on using any other mouse sensitivity setting in the game, you'll have to adjust your head tracking sensitivity accordingly. Refer to the VorpX Universal Guide to learn how to adjust your head tracking manually using the shoulder-to-shoulder method. There you have it. Singularity is now ready for VR. With a few things you'll need to know about. I'll cover some known issues you're almost immediately going to notice with this game, so don't go anywhere. First, let's get the enormous elephant in the room some attention points, shall we? The aliasing is real. If I needed a reference, I'd say we're dealing with a situation similar to Resident Evil 7. But somewhat worse, given now we don't even have an anti-aliasing option. By all accounts, I could swear the visuals have FXAA on them, and I cannot for the life of me find out how to turn it off. The game's registry keys make reference to MSAA, which oddly enough has no effect, but I cannot find a key referring to FXAA. I've even gone as far as force disabling FXAA via the NVIDIA control panel, and still, the game's doing something somehow, and I have no idea what it is specifically, but it looks like nasty FXAA. I've tried applying MSAA using, again, the NVIDIA control panel. This actually did work, but at a performance cost that was way too high. I'm talking a frame rate in the 30s by parts with a mere 2x setting on a high-end system. You can go ahead and tinker with those, but believe me, you'll probably yield the same conclusion. There's just virtually no way around this aliasing mess. Earlier, you may have been surprised to hear me recommend depth of field. I have two reasons for doing this, and one is that the DOF in this game seems to fight off the aliasing just a tad. A cheap way of improving the situation, plus the depth of field in this game strangely acts more as an atmospheric effect rather than a cinematic one like in most games. Given the setup procedure offers a really easy way to set the game to any resolution you want, I do encourage players to try and push beyond the 1600 by 1200 resolution. As long as your numbers give a 4:3 or 5:4 aspect ratio, they should function properly, but like with MSAA, be ready for a violent performance drop. This game may be old, but damn is it ever so sensitive to anything that involves trying to reduce the aliasing. The setup I provide does not have any direct solution for this aliasing problem, but at least the numbers I give should yield very high frame rates on mid and high-end systems, which for VR is indeed a priority. Speaking of frame rates, another issue I discovered is while this game's performance appears to be up to par for VR, it experiences weird apparent skips even while running at a solid 90 frames per second. I believe this may be caused by poor mouse movement interpolation. Past 60 frames per second, the game's estimation of how your mouse moves experiences slight imprecisions, thus giving for an apparently irregular frame rate. The issue is not too prominent throughout most of the game, but sadly you'll be introduced to one of the worst instances of it right at the beginning next to the helicopter that's on fire. This is another mysterious problem I have not been able to nail down. You'll have to use edge peek for two things with this game. Seeing your heads-up display's edges for health, energy, and ammo, and for reading notes. It sounds a bit dreadful, but the game does have pretty excellent prompts to let you know if your health is low or your ammo is out. I've managed pretty well, it's not a big deal. Last but not least, this is a manual VR setup, and thus this means your head tracking's pitch, or vertical axis, will often not match your in-game vertical axis position. This means you can end up looking straight up in the game, while your real head is still at level. This can make gameplay very uncomfortable, and in order to resolve this, I play with a modified mechanical ball mouse. The vertical axis on this mouse has been disabled and doesn't send any information. This makes absolutely sure that the only vertical axis information sent to the game comes from my head tracking and never my mouse. While this greatly improves the situation, I do leave my normal mouse near hand's reach during play in order to readjust my vertical axis. The game will often run prompts, animations, or recoil effects that will cause more vertical axis mismatching, and you'll want a quick way to readjust these at your fingertips. Singularity behaves pretty well in this respect. Full combat sections can go on without needing to readjust. I was surprised about one thing while making this tutorial. Having replayed nearly the equivalent of my entire Let's Play series just to produce this video, I realized I missed the game a lot more than I thought. For the entire first half of this strange oddity, I think it's an excellent VR game, put aside a few minor imperfections with the adaptation. The problem is, about halfway in, the mechanics pile up to a point not only confusing controls-wise, but also confusing in terms of what the game wants to be. Like I said at the beginning, it becomes a thing of nebulous identity. What exactly are we playing? It started off as a horror shooter, progressively introduced mechanics similar to Half-Life 2 and BioShock, then started going into Mirror's Edge type running stuff, then into stealth, then tactical. Come on game, where's that first half I was enjoying so much? I'm highly considering bringing back this game on the channel, especially now that I've enjoyed all the gameplay I performed in this video, playing through the same portions as in my Let's Play, but with far more ease. Likely because now running off a GTX 1080 gets me way more fluid performance. I think I can go for a tentative run at the very sections that originally irritated the hell out of me. It's those goddamn ticks! They're terrible! They go as far as pairing those with some enemy you have to sneak past without making a sound, so naturally the situation becomes unmanageable. Top that off with sudden insistence on requiring the use of a sniper rifle with dreadful aim-down sights. Aim-down sights meant for screen gameplay really sucks in VR, and you've got yourself a convergence of bullshit I just couldn't be fucked to deal with. That being said, this should not be taken as anything else than opinion. It definitely isn't a word of caution. Even I recommend you try this strange game with VorpX if you already own it. Look, we have a lot of great stuff to do in VR already, so I'm not going to go as far as recommending purchasing the game full price just to run it in VR, but if you do see it on sale at half price, then go ahead and get a copy. It's a really nice title that stands out for me. In the process of trying to rip off 11 different mechanics from a handful of competing titles of its time, it sort of oddly ended up becoming something I can't even really identify or categorize. Yes, it's kind of a first-person horror shooter, but it's a lot more than that. Enough that I really don't have the other title I could compare it directly to. It stands on its own. Now it's time to get to the game's vScore. The vScore is a rating system created to evaluate how well a game can be run in VorpX. The score is on a scale of 100 points and is based on 9 criteria. 8 that yield points, and 1 that is a penalty value. The criteria are: first, the fixed points values where a game is given all or nothing for each category. Acceptable 3D method. This is worth 30 points. If we can't have depth perception, we cannot have VR. Next, Geometry 3D brings a game to life by providing the only authentic stereoscopic 3D method, so 15 points for that. We've got beautiful Geometry 3D in Singularity, particles and most of the shadows are spot on. This is lovely. All points for those 2 items. Proper head tracking. Head tracking that goes all over the place isn't fun, so this is worth 15 points. If you can't get good performance out of this game, for example if you're under spec or pushing the limits on the resolution or anti-aliasing, you may see bad mouse movement interpolation which will build up offsets. As long as you're careful to get the game's internal frame rate averaging 60, you'll be fine, and the head tracking will work great. 15 points here. Second, the variable criteria, where the amount of points can be adjusted for each item. Sufficient field of view. A game really needs some means for forcing the field of view, and because of the various ways we can achieve this, some more effective and some less, this is worth up to 15 points. Flawless widescreen to the rescue. It's a good thing because there is otherwise no way to directly control this game's field of view. We've got our 15 points here. Proper 3D hands and weapon models. This has over time become a nice to have, quote unquote, for third-party VR, as it's quite rare, but gets a game up to 5 points for getting it right. These hand models are almost the same kind of bad as Fallout 4. 2 points, enough said. Proper shadows and graphics. Good shadows are hard to come by in VR, especially dynamic ones, so a game can gain up to 5 points on those. Singularity gets 4 out of 5 here because everything works. The only bummer is we have to kill off the dynamic shadows, but those are surprisingly few and far apart anyways. Proper UI and heads-up display. Being able to see your health, ammo count, and such is a plus, isn't it? Up to 5 points for how a game handles a HUD. It was hard to completely slam Singularity here. The HUD is far from good, you'll barely see your health without using edge peek. The same goes for the notes, but I cannot go lower than 3 out of 5 here for one important reason. Those upgrade station UIs are for real. The dude who made those knew VR was going to exist, I tell you. They're too awesome not to consider in this score. It's a bummer the VorpX HUD scale feature isn't with us in this game because it would otherwise be kind of perfect. Direct VR bonus. Direct VR makes the process of setting up a game much easier and often delivers perfect head tracking. Based on how a game supports it, it can get up to 10 points in bonus. Evidently, no Direct VR here, 0 out of 10, moving on. Penalty. The penalty criteria exists to offset a game's score due to glitches or major issues. Up to 10 points can be withdrawn. This game's anti-aliasing issue is still a mystery to me other than the fact that it lands 1 penalty point. I'm still not sure if it's some form of terrible built-in custom FXAA or if it's some kind of upscaling, but even MSAA can't save this game because it brings it to its knees even on careful settings. I'm going to take off another point for this strange apparent uneven framerate issue. Sure, the counter says the game's internal frame rate is as high as 90, but even then I notice a sort of strange skip or shake in the tracking, which really indicates to me there's some weird obscure mouse interpolation going on, and it's not doing well with VR head tracking input. It's not an issue that'll stop you from playing, but in the few moments where it does manifest itself, it's annoying. Singularity lands itself a really nice vScore of 82, which is what we should expect out of a good manual VR setup. I really wish this game was added into the more convenient DirectVR library because by all accounts, it works incredibly well with VorpX. Who knows, maybe soon I'll be forced to update this tutorial and switch to a DirectVR setup. I'd kind of like that. It would actually make this game a lot easier to play, given the vertical axis problem just goes away. Until then, I really do recommend running this one with this pretty decent manual VR setup. That's it for now. We are, by the way, 7 games into this series, moving at a pace quicker than I even expected to hit. I hope every single one of these have helped demystify VorpX for many, and I hope you're all visiting these crazy and completely different worlds. I am open to game suggestions in the comments, by the way, we always are. Keep in mind, I've just recently tried Outlast 2, which yielded a complete failure, as there was no means of getting acceptable 3D, which is a total showstopper. I do not recommend using a VR headset for 2D content, or extremely poor 3D reconstructions, and so Outlast 2 is out. For now. In other experiments, I plan to try and tackle Alien Isolation, hoping to get rid of the major shadow issue I had noticed when initially trying it. Anyways, you'll know what's coming next soon enough. This series has been well received so far, so I plan to take good care of it. Until next time, have a good VR trip to post-apocalyptic semi-time travel Russia with, I'm not really sure what the hell it is Singularity drops you into, but you're going there. Bring me back something. Thanks for watching.